to me at this period was probably the most glamorous job you could have in the United States, because it was a job that was creative, had fairly substantial salary, had very loose working conditions, had lack of respect for authority. It was basically like working in television.
What really makes Mad Men so special is that it presents a world that we kind of yearn to go back to, but it is not an idealized world of nostalgia.
Mad Men is about the conflicting desires in the American male and the people who pay the price for that, who are the women.
When I read the pilot, I read them out of a stack of 25 or 30 other pilots, and it just completely jumped out at me, and it did not read like anything else I'd ever read, really.
All right, this is Give Them an Argument. I am Ben Burgis, your trusty host. We have with us super producer Jake Abbott, union organizer by day, GTA producer by night. We also have apparently trying to replicate a 1990s comedy setup with a brick wall behind him. Our graphic designer, J. Andrew World. How you doing, guys?
What's the deal with airline food?
Good job. So as the cold open teased, the big event tonight is going to be a return guest, Shaun Richman, who we had on a while ago to talk about his excellent book, Tell the Bosses That We're Coming. Shaun has a history also as a union organizer, and is a program director for a sort of labor studies program now, and it's a really interesting, worthwhile book. But what we're talking about with him tonight is a totally different subject, which is an article that he wrote for Jacobin Magazine. Do we have the article? So it's called something like, yeah, there we go. 15 years ago, Mad Men quietly began its engagement with leftist ideas. So that is what we're going to be talking about tonight, which I think is going to be really fun. I'm a big fan of Shaun. I'm a big fan of Mad Men. Really loved that show when it was on, and he has interesting things to say about the connection between the show and lefty ideas. So I'm looking forward to that. That should be fun. But we also have a lot else on our docket. So at the end of the night in the post game, we're going to have Marcus from Left Flank Veterans and also occasional co-host of This Revolution. I think he did that for a while, or maybe still does. I don't know, on the weekends. And we're gonna watch some bonkers Kamala Harris stuff in the post game, and there's going to be much owning of the Dems in the post game, but we have to serve all of our major political food groups here. So right now we are going to start way out on the other end. So in a minute, we're going to revisit some moments from my debate with Tulsi Gabbard, Tim Pool, and James O'Keefe that we didn't get to last episode, which was 2 weeks ago, because last Monday was the 4th of July. And also some of that hadn't been released at that point, but the whole thing's out now. So we're going to talk about some moments of it we didn't get into and that have to do with other people's reactions. But first, let's I'm feeling like, I don't know, sometimes it's like you're hungry for a really specific food, it just has to be that thing. Jake, I'm feeling like Canadian, like a Canadian reactionary, like ideally one who sounds like Kermit. Do we have anybody like that?
Which one? Which there's so many people you could be describing. But yeah, there's some really good content has been dropping recently from Jordan Peterson.
Yes, and I should say, in the interests of owning our losses as well as our wins, 2 weeks ago we had a little fun with Peterson due to his unwillingness to speak to leftists, and since then, to be fair, he has actually gotten around to talking to one, which is Kyle Kulinski. So let's see what happened in that conversation.
If you were an American citizen, you were here in the 2020 election, would you have voted for Trump, Biden, nobody, or a third-party candidate?
I don't know. It's very hard to answer those questions until you're actually in the situation. When Clinton was facing off against Trump, for a very long time, I felt that I would have voted for Clinton. I felt that she had at least the administrative background and the governmental experience to know what the job was and to handle it. I felt that Trump was a wild card, which he most definitely was. Then I went to this, the night of the election, I went to this Republican gala in Canada at a private club, watching the election, and they did a straw vote there. And in the straw vote, I cast my vote for Trump. And that surprised me. And it was something I sort of switched on last minute. And the reason I switched, I would say, is because I thought Clinton betrayed the working class. In fact, that's why she lost the election. It isn't something I just felt. That's definitely what happened. And so I thought, to hell with you. I'd rather have this wild card in here with his spontaneous lies than have you in here with your programmatic, powered, mad, driven, pre-authorized lies. And so I don't know. It's hard to tell what you do in a situation until you're actually in it.
Do you think Trump as president in his 4 years also betrayed the working class?
Not in the same manner, no.
Really?
And I think Trump did some things that were really quite spectacular.
Like
one
what?
of them.
Like what?
Well, how about no war?
Yeah, it is funny. Like he really thought that he was going to support Clinton, but then he was at some like private dinner for Republicans, and he just, I don't know. I mean, he just ended up being pro-Trump. I mean, it's just the weirdest damn thing that this happens.
The strangest thing, I actually did spend an evening at the National Democratic Club, and at the end of it, I was all like, "Yeah, Pelosi." So I get it. I totally understand.
Yeah, he has a little bit of that Tim Pool-itis where he's kind of a liberal, but then something mystical happens in him when he's choosing, who to vote for president, and then he'll end up choosing the right-wing candidate for leftist reasons, just like Tim Pool, to support his pro-working class, moderate but still pro-working class opinions. I mean, we saw how Peterson was a huge supporter of, what was it, like the trucker protests in Canada. I'm sure there's a whole bevy of pro-working class policies that he's on record of supporting, right? I'm sure it's not just that.
Yeah. I mean, the Tim Pool case is weird because Tim, like, we watched on the show some of his original video saying that, I guess I'm going to support Trump, which was quite a shift from beforehand when he was like, no, if you vote for either of the mainstream candidates, you're like Thanos. And it's like, actually, it's okay to vote for the lesser evil. In fact, I'm going to take the greater evil. But like when he did, he was like almost apologetic. He's like, no, but if you look at this is good. He was like going through the Trump program. And I would not claim to have paid close attention to Tim Pool's more recent content, except as it involves me, because, life is short. But I don't know. I mean, just judging by the thumbnails, the little snippets I've seen and stuff, which now it all seems to be like, hell yeah, baby, it's MAGA month. It's like there's that hesitation, really went out the window some time ago.
Yeah, I only watch Tim Pool vicariously through the surf, so I don't really, I get it filtered to me from Lance. So, thank you, Lance.
Fair enough. Yeah. So Jordan Peterson, though, this is really fascinating that his reason, and I could understand, right, given some of Jordan Peterson's, commitments, that he might have all sorts of reasons for supporting Trump, that, that he thinks, like Peterson, I remember back in 2018, seemed to be very concerned that he was going to be, sent to I don't know, a gulag in the north of Canada somewhere for not saying his students' preferred pronouns. So, maybe he thought that, that Trump was less on board with that sort of thing. And like, he could support Trump because of that. It's like, all right, I understand it. Conservatives are going to conservative. Like that's that makes sense on its own terms. But the reason that he gave here is just fascinating, right? That like he says that the reason that he ended up deciding that he was rooting for Trump after all is that Hillary Clinton betrayed the working class, which is, by the way, the first inkling I've ever had that Jordan Peterson took an interest in the working class, right? That as far as I'd ever known, right? His only sort of source of engagement with the working class, was telling them how they could be promoted out of the working class if they stood up straight and cleaned their rooms and and all of that sort of thing. So he has this newfound concern for the working class, and the first thing he does with it is support Donald Trump, who's like, Kyle's actually been very nice about it in that clip, but like, Trump spent 4 years on this orgy of deregulation and tax cuts for rich people. He appointed super duper hardcore union busters to the National Labor Relations Board, and they overturned a bunch of Obama era precedents that, in the direction, right, of making it harder, under the Trump NLRB to organize unions. I mean, look, I can respect somebody who said, Hillary Clinton. I mean, it's kind of a funny phrase. Hillary Clinton betrayed the working class. It sort of makes it sound like she was a socialist at one point, and then she had some. I mean, I'm pretty sure Hillary always sucked. But like, if you're gonna say, Hillary has supported all sorts of things that are terrible for the working class, then I'd say, yeah, I agree with your premise, right? That's true, right? We could argue about what to do with that, right, tactically or strategically in terms of voting, but I mean, the premise is true. And somebody who was like, look, I can't hold my nose and vote for the lesser evil. It's still too evil. I'm just gonna not, even if I live in a super swingy swing state, I'm not gonna pull that lever for Hillary because she's just too bad. So therefore, I'm gonna, I don't know, vote for Jill Stein, or maybe the Socialist Workers Party had a candidate. You could vote for them, or you're just gonna stay home, right, and like do shots and angrily listen to the Internationale. It's like I can understand and respect all of those, but even if I might disagree tactically, right, but like Trump, you're gonna support Trump because you just care so damn much about the workers?
It seems kind of akin or of a sort with like this weird pivot that Charlie Kirk is trying to, they're trying to do this rhetorical pivot, but we're kind of yet to. My guess would be that he's assuming that the working class, like, as by and large, has the same like social politics as he does, right? And then Hillary, and I guess probably the move is that Hillary abandoned them by giving into woke politics, which is then made the argument is that woke politics are just like rich idiot politics, and that's how she abandoned it. That's the only, I assume that's the move he's trying to make, but maybe that's reading too much coherence into it.
No, I mean that's good hustle. I like it. I don't know if that's what he's thinking or not, but it may be, right? I mean, this is the kind of thing that people say sometimes. I was going to say to pick on someone who's at least on a show that I like, even if I don't particularly like his politics, Sagar and Jenny, in a, if you read his review of Thomas Frank's populism book, he sort of floats this move there, that's like, well, who's to say what's real populism? It's all populism, because like, there's more than just economics, there's culture, and that's, and I talked about this actually. So I just, last week I had an article come out of the Daily Beast, called, Culture War Red Meat is All the GOP Serves the Working Class, I think is what it was called. Yeah, there we go. That's it. Raw deal. Nice little graphic there. You can see with the bloody steak with the crucifix and the flag coming out of it. So they really, somebody at the Daily Beast graphics department really outdid themselves there, and you can see like some flags with like feminist and gay icons and iconography, like sort of marinated in the blood. So
shout out to people who make those graphics, because often they're just like really, I mean, just a lot of publications.
Yeah.
I'm like, the graphics department is like, should get a raise.
Like, no, seriously, I don't want whatever they're being paid. They should get a raise, for sure. But I quote, I quote that line from Engetti's, review of the Thomas Frank book in there, and what I point out is, it's like, well, look, what this is missing. One of the things it's missing, besides the fact that, like, this is kind of the W.E.B. Dubois. I'm never sure how to say that. But
I believe it's Dubois, but
Dubois,
people
okay,
accept Dubois because it's just one of those weird common things.
Yeah, fair enough. So, the W.E.B. Dubois' point about, when he uses this phrase, the visible wages of whiteness, that, like, it's often been misunderstood later, but, like, his point in context, right? He's a Marxist, right? He thought, he thought that it's like, no, it's not like, oh, see, this is this great privilege, that, like, Southern white workers are getting out of this. Like, he thought they were being sold a sack of shit, right? That they, it's like fool's gold, right? It's like, oh, like, you feel like you're getting something out of it, but you're not, it's this point, right? Like, you're actually getting division and all this stuff, right? But it's like the same kind of point here. That's like, look, I don't think you can have, cultural like, if populism means anything, and, like, if it doesn't just refer to a rhetorical style, in which case, sure, anybody can use it, fair enough, right? You could use it for any purpose, but, like, if it means that there's some substantive sense in which you're siding with, like, the people against elites, then there is no such thing as cultural populism, because the nature of cultural divides is that, they split people up at every level of the economic hierarchy, right? There are, people in the working class with extremely socially conservative views and with extremely socially liberal views, and everything in between, right? That's how culture works, right? So the tendency is not at all, right, to like, unite working class people against some sort of elite, right? It's to, that kind of supposed populism, right? You're just attacking each other, and often, like, doing, in the conservative variant, like, often doing, like, really awful things to prove that you have the right cultural sensibilities. But, like, that's not, if that's what he means, right? It's like, well, yeah, you're attacking, socially liberal elites, I guess, but you're also attacking socially liberal, workers more so, right? And there's no, there's no sense in which you're taking the side of the working class as a whole, against any sort of elite, if you do that. And meanwhile, on anything that actually matters in material reality, right? Not that the social policies that might be waged in the sort of name of culture war don't matter materially, they do, right? But, like, in terms of, like, direct sort of people versus elites questions in material reality, like, what are you actually doing, right? You're supporting, again, Trump, was like Trump tried to take away, like, attack the Medicaid expansion, right? Tried to kick a shit ton of people off of Medicaid. He tried to make it much harder to get bridge cards, right? What's colloquially known as food stamps. That they like, on every possible level, right? He was waging war against, poor and working class people, and bringing it to the Daily Beast article. Right, they have, like, the sort of occasion for that article is that the Texas GOP just put out its state party platform, which, the things that people really noted about it, like, in most of the press coverage, were, like, one, had, like, all kinds of super blood curdling reactionary social policies, of course, right? Really went after gay and trans people, and two, that it had that, like, it officially committed them to the Trumpist conspiracy theory about the 2020 election, right? And those are both big deals, right? Those are both worth writing about. But the reason I wrote the article is that what I didn't really see anybody talking about was that it, like, the way I put it in the article is that like they committed themselves to this platform to every possible pro-corporate and anti-worker policy short of reinstituting child labor in coal mines or giving bosses the right of prima nocta, right? I mean, it's like and like not that far short, of those.
Give them time. They're working on the good arguments for that.
Yeah, fair enough. So it's like pretty amazing in light of this kind of rebranding, right? That Jake is talking about. That which plenty of Texas Republicans have participated in. Ted Cruz had this whole speech at CPAC last year about how it's not just the party of country clubs anymore. It's the party of hardworking blue collar men and women. And he starts listing off all these categories about, waitresses and pipeline workers. And, it's like, horseshit, right? I mean, like you want to privatize Social Security. Okay. Last thing I want to say before we move on about this Jordan Peterson clip is that like weird sort of like almost like I don't know, it's like he almost sounded like some sort of what are these politically ambiguous people like, your Tim Pools, your Jimmy Dores maybe, your like Tulsi Gabbard's maybe, like where he's like, oh, how about no war at the end, which is also funny for many reasons, but like the biggest thing is it's like saying that Trump didn't start any wars is like saying that somebody who spends 4 years shooting firecrackers into a dry forest is deserves a prize because like none of the, because like there was never a full-blown forest fire at any point, right? It's like the dude assassinated Soleimani and brought us closer to the brink of war, certainly than we've been with Iran anytime, maybe since the hostage crisis, right? That's he did these wild mood swings on North Korea where, he did make peace at one point, but like before that, like he was like doing these like this weird Twitter beef with the supreme leader of North Korea where, where it like really seemed like something might happen there. He was actually, even on the Russia stuff, he was actually much more belligerent toward Russia than Obama had been. He sent heavy weapons to Ukraine, right, which Obama hadn't. The Republicans had criticized Obama for not doing, he bombed Syria, that like this idea that it, well, anyway, let's just wrap this up. So we have I believe we have like 20 more seconds of that exchange with Kyle Kulinski, which is just puts the perfect bow on this.
Well, he did assassinate a top Iranian commander who was fighting ISIS on the ground.
say that. I didn't say anything about assassination. I said something very specific.
I would say that's an act of war.
No, it's not an act of war. It's an assassination. An act
to
of
kill
war
an Iranian commander?
I don't understand the point you're making.
All right, can anybody help him understand the point?
Yeah.
If you kill a general in another country's army very openly, that is generally considered to be the sort of thing that the other country is entitled to view as an act of warfare. I mean that seems like a pretty straightforward point.
Yeah, hell, if you kill a private, it's considered an act of war.
That's true. It's a good point. Okay. All right. I want to bring on Shaun very soon, so let's just run through the last couple things before then. So one is that I want to, before we completely move off the reaction areas for tonight, or at least for this part of tonight, I do want to go back to that debate with James O'Keefe, Tulsi Gabbard, and Tim Pool to make two quick points about it. So the first has to do with O'Keefe himself. I think we have like a clip, like maybe 3 or 4 minutes from the debate itself.
Ben, how does Jacobin approach these problems?
Yeah, I mean, Jacobin is a independent, meaningfully independent organization. It's not beholden to wealthy investors or stockholders or big donors. So yeah, it actually does use its platform to have to shine a light on things that genuinely powerful people do. So it does actually, if you read like the kinds of things that Branko Marcetic, for example, has been writing there about the war in Ukraine and about tech censorship, he's much more of a, he's much more of a journalist. I'm much more of a, columnist and polemicist. But I think that he's been doing really exemplary work that he can do because of that. And of course, I do agree, right? I do agree with Tim that, that there are certain standards of factual accuracy that you should absolutely not sacrifice for the sake of what your ideological preferences are, right? You need to tell it like it is and then make your argument. But I do also feel good, right? I feel a lot better being associated with the kind of media organization that actually is interested in taking on the most powerful people in our society.
Like the FBI?
Yes, for example, yeah. That is interested in taking on the most powerful people in society rather than acting as gutter-level snitches to surveil working-class people and try to get them fired.
I'm going to bring it to you. Ben, do you think that, so you just made an insinuation about big donors with Project Veritas. Yes.
Well, if I'm wrong, please correct me. Do you not have donors?
Do you think that was a fair insinuation? Do you actually think that James is subject
if
to
not,
donors?
I mean, the man himself is here. He can tell us. Do you not have donors, James? Because like a lot of that website reads to me, maybe this is wrong, but a lot of it screams to me laid out to show donors what they're getting. So for example, that Teachers Union Gone Wild series, if you look at that on the Project Veritas website, there is a little description of the setup. There's some embedded videos, and then there's a subheading called results, which, again, a lot of times organizations that are very concerned with proving to donors their money won't be wasted will do something like this on their website. In that case, by the way, what the results page brags about is the weakening of tenure protections to make it easier to fire people, which of course, clap for that, which of course, if you care about free speech, is exactly the opposite of what you'd want.
May I, when you first started talking, you made a statement of fact that was factually and legally untrue. And I think you said that we are beholden to donors, and you kind of grimaced at me and smirked at me, obviously referring to Project Veritas being, quote, I have the video. We have an entire audience of people. And you said that I am...
James, I just gave you the opportunity to correct me
You're the
if my impression is wrong. Are you going to correct me or not?
Ben, please let James
Please let me just finish a sentence, please. You said that I'm beholden, quote, it's a direct quote, we have it on video, beholden to donors. That is factually and legally untrue. No donor has ever, and I would swear to it under oath, told me what to do. And yet, on this stage, in front of all these people in New York City,
oh my God,
you just made a statement of fact. So in a world where you can say that, I've never offered conjecture or characterization in our reports, but you did that right here on a panel about media manipulation. We have nearly 100,000 people who give money to our foundation so that I can be independent.
All right. So if you think that anybody who listened to that or watched it thinks they heard an answer to the question about whether they have they're reliant on wealthy donors, presumably that answer was implied. And well, we have 100,000 people who've donated to us. Maybe so, right? Maybe they do have 100,000 people. I would like to know the percentage of the cash that they have that comes from, say, the top 100 of those 100,000 people versus the bottom 9,900, or even the top 10 of those people versus the bottom 900, 900,000, 999, and 90. And I did look into this afterwards. I was like, oh my God, have I unfairly maligned James O'Keefe? Does he not, in fact, have a bunch of super wealthy donors? And I looked into this, and I gave most of these stories you're about to see, and the article that I had out of Jacobin today, which is called James O'Keefe doesn't care about free speech. Yeah, James O'Keefe doesn't care about free speech. Just came out this morning. So if you look at that article, I hyperlinked a bunch of this stuff there, but let's just run through it really quickly just for fun. So, so this is from The Hill, not a very left-wing source, says conservative donor Mercer donated to O'Keefe projects. Next, Project Veritas received $1.7 million last year from charity associated with the Koch brothers. Next, the Koch brothers and Robert Mercer bankrolled right-wing firm Project Veritas. Next, Dark Money GOP fund funneled millions of dollars to groups that that pushed voter fraud claims. I believe that one's another Koch connection that they established something called the Donor Network to basically provide some level of anonymity for Koch-funded projects.
I think launder's the word you're looking for.
Perhaps. Next, so this is from a group called that it has it goes through a bunch of there we go. The Donors Trust and Donors Capital Fund. Those are two of those Koch fund arms. And finally, I do want to say, I do want to take responsibility, own my L's here, that I did have a major, journalistic failing in that Jacobin article, which is that I didn't mention or have a hyperlink to the money that we've got in our final graphic, which is the money. This is way back at the beginning of Project Veritas that James O'Keefe got from one Peter Thiel. So again, I don't know what the average donation was, those 100,000 people, but I'm going to guess Peter probably coughed up more than them. Like, and to be fair, this wasn't one of Peter Thiel's biggest donations by a long shot. I think he gave him like a few tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, he probably found that in his couch. But I would guess that, there are at least, say, 950,000 of those, like that or there are at least, 95,000, right, of those 100,000 donors who did not, in fact, have tens of thousands of dollars to donate. I don't know what the biggest contribution you guys ever gave a political organization is, but I'm guessing less than that.
I gave $100,000 to Chapo Trap House. I just thought they didn't have enough money, so their Patreon needed yeah. Unfortunately, most of us can barely scrounge together like $15-20 a month, right?
Yeah.
So.
And sometimes it's just I'm making art because I can't do anything else.
Yeah, exactly. And I should say too that the other respect to which James is playing dumb here is that he's saying, "Oh, beholden to big donors," you must mean that somebody's getting on the phone and telling me, "Hey, I'm from the Mercer family. I'm from the Koch family. I'm from whichever dark money conservative organization. I need you to do this specific thing or not do that specific thing." But that's not how that works, right? I mean, as in fact, I believe our good friend and comrade and collaborator Jason Miles actually yelled out from the audience in one of his attempts at counter heckling that extremely hostile crowd. That's not how donors work, right? You don't need to make the call, right? I mean, maybe you do, but I mean, generally speaking, right? Something's gone wrong if you've gotten to that point, right? I think if you're getting dump trucks full of cash from the Mercer family and the Koch brothers, or now just the one Koch brother, or these Peter Thiel, right? Then you generally know what's going to make them happy, right? They don't have to call you. Hey, what's going to keep the money coming, and what's going to stop the money in a hurry. And so, I think if he was sending his little hidden cameras into, meetings where Starbucks managers were plotting out, union busting strategy, for example, or some meeting, at the Defense Department of the CIA where they're talking about drone strikes, I think that the money would stop in a hurry, right? Palantir, money man, Peter Thiel wouldn't be donating to that. So just wanted to follow up on that. And then we have one last thing, very briefly, I hope, before we get to Shaun, which is a follow-up on a different part of the debate. So I don't want to play a whole thing from it, but I think we have just the little 60-second montage for this that we put out on the TikTok and as a YouTube short. So just to refresh people's memory about this part of the debate.
If part of your concern is about social media manipulation, is about censorship, if you actually care about understanding the source of the problem, you should think about what are people really worried about. We live in enough of a democracy that by and large people aren't worried about getting arrested. What are they worried about? They're worried about getting fired. Because the majority of Americans work in non-unionized workplaces where the boss can fire them at any time with no recourse and no due process. When you're a member of a union, you actually have an organization that will represent you when you're accused of wrongdoing.
Oh, I couldn't imagine, based on what you'd said, that'd been true, because I've been in 2 unions, and they were so corrupt.
However corrupt that union might have been that you were part of, if you had been accused of an infraction subject to disciplinary process, then you would have had the option of having them represent you in that process. That
Wrong. Your subjective perspective.
It's not subjective. It's a fact that the effect of unions is to give you due process.
And sometimes they don't, because humans are fallible.
Okay, but you can say the same thing about having trial by jury. It's still a due process.
All right, so the last episode of a podcast that we like around here, Valley Labor Report, or I don't know if it was an episode or a stream or what it was officially, but anyway, in any case, something Valley Labor Report put out. They went through some of that debate. They took issue with part of it. They didn't like the sort of level at which I'd emphasize the sort of lawyer analogy, because they were worried that might suggest a sort of third-partyized kind of service unionism model, although we kind of hashed it out on Twitter, and they ultimately agreed that that's more of a matter of emphasis, than a substantive disagreement. But the part I want to highlight here, just to put a last little bow on this, is something that the other union, Jake, from Valley Labor Report, said, that about that last exchange with Tim Pool, right, where Tim is saying, "Oh, that's subjective," right? That I think that unionization gives you due process when you're about to be fired, and I just want to play just a minute of the Valley Labor Report response to this.
What Ben was saying is so important that it has actually been enshrined into law that unions have a duty to represent you fairly. And if unions do not represent you fairly, if you are disciplined on the job, and this is an individual response, and but it's more than people in non-union workplaces have. If you are disciplined on the job, and your union legitimately does not represent you fairly or at all, and you deserved representation, you can file a failure to represent against them, an unfair labor practice with the NLRB, and make them represent you. Like, it's illegal for them not to represent you.
Right.
So we could just maybe add this to the list. We've done a few segments of the format. Tim Pool doesn't understand, fill in the blank, and I think that labor law perhaps belongs on that list. All right, I'm gonna see you guys in the post game for patrons with Marcus from Left Flank Veterans, which should be a very good time. But right now we have our main guest for this evening, a friend of mine for a very long time, Shaun Richman. How you doing, Shaun?
I'm doing good. Good to see you, comrade.
Yeah, absolutely. So Shaun has been on the show before to talk about his excellent book, "Tell the Bosses We're Coming," a new action plan for workers in the 21st century. Shaun has worked as a labor organizer. He's the program director of a labor studies program.
I do labor stuff at a college. It got complicated.
Okay, labor stuff at a college. We can leave it at that. And is and does a lot of other things too. But what I actually want to talk to him about tonight is a really cool article that he wrote about one of my favorite TV shows, one that doesn't, I think, to many people's minds, lend itself to this sort of analysis, but he has interesting things to say about it. And that is AMC's Mad Men. So this is the article in Jacobin Magazine 15 years ago. Mad Men quietly began its engagement with leftist ideas. So Sean, take us through this a little bit. What was the sort of germ of this article?
The germ. I came to Mad Men a little late. I only started watching it on Netflix when they would mail you DVDs in the mail after the third season had ended. I had a lot of friends like trying to say to me like, "Oh, you should watch this. This is like right up your alley." And I was like, "Why? Because they wear hats all the time?" And so I finally broke down and I watched it, and the first episode is it's moody and atmospheric, and there's this big surprise ending at the end that I think is what really drew a lot of its initial audience in. I'll try to avoid the spoiler alert on that one, but for me, the highlight of the pilot episode, like the thing that they were using to sell themselves on this is a show that you should watch, was this pitch, right? It takes place in an advertising agency. It's the year 1960. The Surgeon General's about to say that cigarettes cause cancer. And so tobacco companies can't do what they used to do in television commercials when they can advertise on television for tobacco. They can't have a doctor come in and go like, "Oh, it really satisfies your T-zone." Oh, they couldn't do that anymore. They couldn't make any health claims about cigarettes. In fact, things were about to go entirely opposite, where they'd have to put giant labels on there saying like, "This thing's going to kill you." And so, Don Draper, who's ostensibly the protagonist of the show, although arguably, because it is, I think, much more of a feminist narrative than I think a lot of people give it credit for. He's head of creative at this advertising agency, and he's just floundering all day trying to figure out how he's going to sell his client Lucky Strike on a new strategy around cigarettes. He's writing strategies on cocktail napkins. He's drinking an old-fashioned cocktail. He's smoking the Lucky Strike cigarettes. He's off banging his mistress. And he gets to the presentation and he still doesn't have anything. And the clients just start walking out. And they're like, "Well, at least we know we have the same problem as everybody else." And that makes me go, "You have the same opportunity as everybody else." And he's like, "This is the biggest opportunity since, the invention of cereal. We have 6 companies with 6 identical products, and we just get to say what we're about." And he's like, "Tell me how you make your cigarettes." And the old man, who's the CEO of the company, just starts blathering on about the North Carolina sun and the genetic engineering that goes into their seeds. And he just sort of says, and among the process is that the leaves are toasted before they're rolled. And he goes, "That's it. It's toasted." And they're like, "Yeah, they're all toasted." He goes, "No, they're all full of cancer. Lucky Strikes are toasted." And that, to me, just jumped out at me because there's a very classic mid-century Marxist textbook called Monopoly Capital, written by Paul Baran and Paul Sweezy. I think a lot of labor people actually know a book that riffed off of it called Labor and Monopoly Capital, which is really one of the most essential readings if you want to understand your role in the economy as a worker. But Monopoly Capital was sort of the foundation of just establishing what is capitalism in post-World War II the world, but particularly in America. And what the authors were arguing is that it had become monopoly, even though you had the appearance of 6 competing products. They weren't really competing on price anymore, that it really had become monopoly, and that there was so much waste in that system. And one of the central arguments they make, one of the climactic chapters of the book, is about the advertising industry, which they're like, capitalism can now create enough value and enough of essential products and essential goods that like everybody's covered. We can actually provide for everybody in the world. Instead, these companies are competing over, market share, and all they're doing is they're spending a tremendous amount of money that could go towards, increasing productivity, increasing worker pay, lowering the price of the product. And instead, they're trying to convince you that like one brand of cigarette is better than the other. And they use It's Toasted, which wasn't even a Lucky Strike slogan. It was it's a much smaller tobacco company. It's not a famous advertising campaign. It's not, where's the beef? It's largely forgotten. I only because of this book, I was like, wow, they're saying something here. And so I was hooked on the show from there. Burned through the discs, which, you couldn't really binge in those days. Yeah. One disc with 3 episodes. You'd send it back the next disc with 3 episodes. But I got to the point where by the time season 4 was starting, after they took a long hiatus, I think, I was caught up. And then I was like trying to figure out ways to watch it live without even having cable. So it was a lot of in hotels a lot those days. And, I would buy a 99-cent download from Apple TV, and it became a thing. And I think that in those last seasons, like you and I would banter on Facebook about it.
Yeah.
Like, there were a lot of like leftist people who watched the show, maybe as sort of like a guilty pleasure, but the left press didn't really write about it much at the time. And so, I wrote this piece, and frankly, I wrote it. I wrote it for like a grad school class. Like I've just been like using my tuition benefit at school, and so I took a course where it was like you have to critique something that's not nonfiction. So it's like, oh well, I'll write this thing that I've been this pet thing in my head that I've been nursing. And maybe I'll sell it to like, one of those cool like culture blogs or, The Atlantic or whatever. And I couldn't because it wasn't newsworthy. So finally the 15th anniversary rolls around. I tried all of those sort of prestige outlets, and then good old reliable Jacobin was like, yeah, we'll take it. It's right up our alley.
Fair enough. So it is interesting. Like, I mean, the thing about monopoly capital, is maybe worth taking a beat on, like why that, essay and, and book, were such a big deal, because, that's pretty, I mean, just to go away from Mad Men for a second, right? I mean, this is a pretty big rupture in sort of traditional socialist analysis. I mean, if you read Capital, Marx's analysis of how capitalism works is all about competition. He's talking about how there are various things that capitalists do because they're sort of forced by the laws of competition with other capitalists to do them. And so this is, I mean, not that it's original to those guys. I mean, you've been, Lenin had been writing about this and stuff like that. But I mean, this is a big kind of conceptual shift to start thinking in terms of, in terms of monopoly, or something close enough to being a monopoly that like it almost didn't matter that it wasn't, as this sort of like mainstay of your analysis of how capitalism in your perception worked in the world.
Yeah. And I should point out that my book, I'm kind of proud of it. My book came out on Monthly Review Press, which I'm impressed because I can't quote chapter and verse on theory.
Sure.
They are really the like the high church of Marxism. And one of the things to note about Monthly Review, just to place it in a historical perspective, because I think Monopoly Capital came out in like 1956. Very, very like Cold War era, right? And when Monthly Review, the magazine, started publishing in like 48, 49, just the worst of the Red Scare. And they did some impressive things, right? Like Albert Einstein wrote an article for the first issue of Monthly Review, which is a very brave and bold thing, and they sort of staked out this independent sort of Marxist space where they weren't, they weren't Soviet bashers,
right?
But they also were not in the Communist Party. In fact, their magazine created a crisis within the Communist Party because the Communist Party was deeply under attack from all sides, but largely state repression.
Yeah.
And the hardcore activists that were staying loyal to it were watching in frustration that the kind of debates, the kind of analysis that they wish their party was doing was happening over here at this scrappy, startup. Whereas they were doubling down on, they were almost reinventing the 1920s. Like they were getting ready to go underground, instead of like making a sort of a full-throated free speech, almost wrap yourself in the reddest parts of the red, white, and blue, and say, like, no, we have a right to, like, there's a right to be an American communist. Instead, they retreated, and they sort of did this sort of ideological purity, round circle firing squad. And so Monthly Review became the place where like serious, like really Marxist, really left-wing ideological debate took place. And yeah, I mean, that's one of their breakthroughs. Again, I think of, in labor households, it's kind of funny, in labor households that have union organizers, union leaders who have books, who have bookshelves. Labor and Monopoly Capital by Harry Braverman is there. Most of us have it in like the 1970s or 1980s edition, which has like these little like stick walking figures on the spine. There's newer edition. I'm not going to shame the millennials that have that one, but it's very much like you go to somebody's house and you see that book on the shelf and you're like, you're my people. Okay. We've learned from some of the same people. We've been assigned this book by some of the same people.
Yeah, actually, I was just thinking I did have a subscription to the Monthly Review for a year because a very elderly comrade who I was a big fan of in Central New Jersey, DSA, got me a gift subscription at one point, but yeah,
I subscribe every now and then because I went to the Socialist Scholars Conference or the Left Forum, and it's like, $6 for a year. It's like, oh, yeah, $6. I'll take a year.
Fair enough. Yeah. So I should say, we can get into a little bit more of the actual engagement with lefty ideas that shows up on the show, but. Jake, if we have this clip, I think there's I think we did find an interesting piece of evidence that Matthew Weiner, the creator of Mad Men, is maybe the sort of person who would have run into to this book that you're talking about. Do we have it's the one? It's called I Play With It, the clip. So if
the Pete and Lane fight, believe it or not, that story starts with Lane's frustration. Pete and Don having switched lives. We see him on the train in the opening episode. Lane's dissatisfaction, as we see when he has this romance with this owner of the wallet's girlfriend. And we see people sort of not paying attention to their material needs, which to me is always the tension in the show. There's a theory, and obviously a very famous theory, I think it's Maslow, who says that when your material needs are met, you start thinking this is when your spiritual needs become an issue. If you have food and shelter, then you start thinking about, religion and satisfaction and psychological issues, which I don't even know is really true, because Karl Marx thinks it's the exact opposite, actually. He thinks that people who have no material benefits are the most religious. So who knows what it is, but I like to play with it, and I know that it's an issue.
Which I just think is kind of funny that's his like top of mind go to. It's like, but then again, Marx does say, religion's the opium of the people.
Yeah, no, I mean, he clearly read far and wide. I mean, I worried a little bit as I was in fact check on this thing because, and I looked at it when I was writing the piece for Grants. And I mean, every reference to It's Toasted is Mad Men at this point. There's nothing else there. And in the footnotes, Baron and Sweezy cite some advertising guy who wrote a book about advertising, which apparently a lot of them did.
Sure.
Around this era. Like they were so full of themselves. It was like, I'm going to write a book about how awesome I am. And so it's
like
one of
the line for which is funny because I mean that's the kind of thing that's all over Mad Men, right? So they obviously has lines about how like every desk in this office probably has the first 3 chapters of a novel in it,
Yeah, exactly. And then eventually go, maybe I'll write a memoir. And so it's possible that I mean he was researching advertising, a show about advertising, so it's possible that he only read the memoir, but the critique seems pretty central that Baran and Sweezy put together, and then you start to connect it to all these other things that he riffed on over the seasons, and it's clear that at a minimum he read far and wide. And he definitely played with some left-wing ideas, right? There's the quoting of the Port Huron statement that doesn't even get named.
Let's just maybe slow down on that. Remind us of how it comes up in the show.
So it's I feel like it's season 3. So it's the original advertising agency, Sterling Cooper, and they're starting to realize that like there's a youth market and they need to get younger copywriters to help capture this youth market, right? So it's probably like pre-baby boom, right? Because baby boomers are born post 45. If you're 1960, you're talking about 15-year-olds. I don't think you're selling coffee to 15-year-olds, although I wouldn't put it past the advertising industry. Maybe they are. But people were having kids before they went off to World War II. So there were like these younger people that was like, oh, we can't advertise to them like we did to people that grew up with the Great Depression. People have no memory of it. And so these 2 copywriters who come in as a pair, who are kind of a fascinating group. One of them is he reads as Eastern European. He also sort of is openly homosexual, as he says. The other one is just the smarmiest of smarmy MFers, and so they're doing this presentation about like an instant coffee brand, and the smarmy one is like they put on like a tape. They're playing some like I don't know some island music, and Smitty is his name. He's like, I got this letter from my friend, man. He's in college, and he had this 17-page rant, and he starts quoting from it, and it's like, if you're on the left, you're like, oh, that's the Port Huron statement,
Yeah.
And Draper's like, oh, it's a beautiful sentiment. What'd your friend think of it? He's like, oh, that was a shitty note with it.
Yeah. What does your friend think of what you do for a living, right? That's
yeah. Read this. Drop out of Madison Avenue. What are you doing? And again, it goes unmentioned that it's the Port Huron statement, but it was again another sort of early sort of statement of like, the show is playing around with some ideas here, right? Like how quickly, people are willing to sell out their own for $1, right? It's like, beautiful ideas. I mean, clearly the 17-page rant struck with Smitty. It struck him as something beautiful and profound. And then he instantly profanes it by being like, oh, this should be the basis of our instant coffee ad.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, just fine. So it's we would replace power rooted in possession, privilege, or circumstance by power and uniqueness rooted in love, reflectiveness, reason, and creativity. Is the quote from the 17-page rant, and there are little things like this that are sprinkled throughout the show. This will be the one place we'll risk since it's like 10 seconds. The anger of the copyright gods, and actually show a very, very brief clip from the show if we've got it, Jake.
How about something like Mohawk breaking strike one flight at a time, or maybe fly over the picket line with a Mohawk.
Hey, Trotsky, you're in advertising.
That's funny. And you know what? Actually, I remember blogging about that episode because this is such a nerdy thing.
Yeah.
Mohawk was operating while the other airlines were striking because they had pre-signed a contract with the union. In industry-wide bargaining, there's something called a Me Too contract, which is basically a competitor signs an agreement saying with the union, says, whatever my competitor agrees to, I will accept the moment they sign it. Please don't strike.
Mm-hmm.
And like this is kind of essential in industry-wide bargaining, because if you take all the employers on at the same time, you know, I used to work in the hotel industry, right? And like you can't say you don't come to New York.
Right.
You can't stay in a hotel. You have to be able to say, stay at Sheraton hotels, stay at the Westin hotels, don't stay at Hilton, right? And the way that you would accomplish that is in the lead up to when the contract expires, you would get a couple of the corporations where they would sign a Me Too agreement. It was like, great, yeah, you're going to stay, you're going to operate, you're going to get the deal, the terms that everybody else gets, and we're going to tell people to stay there instead of at the other place. So that's what actually was happening with Mohawk. But in that particular episode, some of the younger characters were cracking jokes about feeling like they were strike breakers because they're driving all this like Mohawk had a huge opportunity to pick up a lot of business at the expense of, I don't know who was on strike then. Mohawk eventually wound up getting sucked up into U.S. Airlines, and that winds up getting sucked up into American Airlines. So I don't know who they were on strike at the time.
Yeah, but there is a decent amount of this. I mean, not a ton, but I mean, there's like a trickle of things like this going on in the show, and I think it, I think it represents Weiner or other people involved in the show, being aware of some of this stuff. But I mean, it also makes sense for the characters, right? Because there's a kind of big theme of the show, which is that this kind of tension between the fact that your Don Drapers and Peggy Olsons and all these people sort of do like see themselves as like being like creative minds, right? I mean, they are really invested in the what they sometimes see as an expression of the creative process, but a lot of them are also kind of embarrassed about the fact that it's manifested in advertising, right? That they're selling, Mohawk Airlines or Bethlehem Steel or Lucky Strike cigarettes or or whatever, right? That's what they're doing. That's like a co-optation of the because like there's so much of the show that's about like that It's Toasted scene you talked about, that's about sort of valorizing this like creative process that that you see these characters getting like super excited about these epiphanies that they're having about exactly what the moat juiced is for how to what the advertising slogan should be after they stay up all night thinking about it or whatever. But like they're also embarrassed by it, right? And you have people who are sort of around these other worlds, and and they I mean, the guys, Smitty's friend is sending in the Port Huron statement, right? Peg, they're hanging out. Even Don, right, hangs out with some sort of bohemian artistic intellectual types at various points over the course of the show, right? So there's always this kind of tension there, and the way it's eventually you kind of make the case in the article that it's ambiguously, or maybe not so ambiguously in retrospect, sort of resolved at the end of the show. So I mean, you want to I'm not sure how clear the setup was, but I mean, you want to kind of get into that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that like creative collaborative work is, I think, some of the most fulfilling anything that you could do as a human being. Like I'm trying to think of the most fun I've ever had at work. And in the union organizing world, it's like when you're like planning out a campaign, you've talked to some workers, maybe you have a couple of workers in the room with you, the researchers have figured out, they've gotten like the whatever publicly available financial info is available. You figured out, what kind of regulatory problems the company might have, and you're sitting around a room and you're just trying to come up with, in the union world, this is an obnoxious phrase, it's the theory of the win. It's very much like, what's the pitch? It's the equivalent, and people are spitballing ideas, and like in a really good room where you're not being assholes to each other. It's to analogize to something also in the creative world, it's like it's a little bit like improv of like the yes and it's like I'm not, your idea is not better than mine. We're building on it. And like that moment when you're like, that's it. That might be it.
Yeah.
You know, it feels amazing. And so, yeah, some of the best scenes in that show are those kinds of moments. And in general, I would say one of the things I like about Mad Men is that it is a show about work.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not a lot of TV shows or movies that are actually about work, right? There are TV shows that take place in a workplace, right? Like Cheers took place in a workplace.
Yeah, right.
But, like, it didn't really get into, just the economics of the place or like what Carla had to do to get a raise or anything like that. You know, I put The Wire in the category of a TV show that's about work. Like, you knew what Bodie had to do to get a promotion, right? And you knew what the cops had to do to get a promotion. Like, you knew their work world really well. And so similarly, in that, like, you knew their work world really well, right? You know what Pete was gunning for. You know, you knew what Harry was gunning for in terms of the accounts world. You knew where Peggy saw herself on a trajectory. But again, it's those sort of collaborative, team meetings that were some of the best scenes. But what frustrated me about the show is it was throughout its seasons, it was really playing with this idea of like, these people are so talented. They have an artistic bent, right? They all have 3 chapters of a novel in their desk. Peggy Olson can at least get invited to parties at Andy Warhol's factory, right? They're in the art world. And they could, and perhaps at one point they aspire to do art for its own sake. And yet in its last episode, the show seems to valorize the idea of doing art for commerce is a goal in and of itself, which I just found a very disappointing and cynical comment. I was really disappointed with the show in that regard.
Yeah. So I was still kind of thinking about that point about The Wire, because I think that The Wire was, to a great extent, like, as a show about organizations in general and like what's wrong with them in general, because the thing that The Wire analyzed as like sort of like wrong with the cops is the same thing it sort of analyzes as being wrong with the school system, as being wrong with journalism and electoral politics and some of the later seasons, which is that everybody's just sort of going for the numbers, right? That you have to be able to show, it's like, oh, we arrested X number of people this year, and and crime was down Y amount, and you're sort of chasing that for its own sake, and it leads to mission creep. But yeah, so thinking about the ending of Mad Men, I think it might be, because you have an interesting take about this in the article, and I'm not totally sure that I read it the same way, but let's like set it up a little bit. Like, okay, look, if you haven't seen Mad Men yet in 2022, you can pause the YouTube video and and you can spend the next 3 weeks watching Mad Men, and then you could watch this last part. But set us up a little bit here. What's going on at the end of the show?
So this advertising firm that Don Draper has spent the entire 1960s building up, which again has its own sort of adventures, because one of the most thrilling episodes is when they sort of do this like hijinks, like late night, like steal everything from the office and create a new firm to get out from a corporate merger. But they just wind up getting sucked back into like the biggest advertising firm on Madison Avenue. And almost nobody finds satisfaction there. The one partner who was a woman is sexually harassed out of the job almost immediately. Don Draper is just sort of appalled that like, like the scene where like all of the accounts men are like wearing these like short sleeve white shirts, no jacket, because it's like casual, and like Draper can't abide by that just on an aesthetic level, which I can understand.
Sure.
But also, it's like, oh, so we have some research on the kind of man who would drink a light beer, and like it's just nonsense. It's just like it's just like you're describing a man. You're describing what you think a man is in the year 1970. That's what you're doing. Like there's nothing here. It's like, and he just walks out and just never returns. And he winds up driving across the country, and he winds up in California, which for the entire series, California is this weird draw, which I kind of understand also, because as a lifelong New Yorker, like when you're in Los Angeles, you're like, oh, I'm in some place that's no place else. This is, like, the sun is shining, and I suddenly want to drive around in a convertible, and I want to blow off meetings, and it's amazing. And he winds up, I think, in Northern California, actually, in this this yoga retreat with it's dry, which is a big deal because he's basically a functional alcoholic. And he's just his ex-wife is dying, and he's like trying to connect with his mentee, his protege. And he's trying desperately to marry somebody, to have a third unsuccessful marriage. And he finally just gets into the yoga thing, and we last see him on this cliff, just doing the Om pose, as the famous Coca-Cola jingle that became a #1 hit single, "I'd Like to Teach the World to Sing," is slowly sort of getting cranked up. And it's clear for anybody who's seen that video that when you rewind and you look at at the scenes as he's getting to this point, there are people who look just like the people in that commercial, right?
Yeah.
These are intentional choices by the casting director and the costumes people, and by Matthew Weiner, to imply that maybe Don Draper made this horribly cynical Coca-Cola advertisement. Or my preferred interpretation is that he just dried out, went back home, was a present father with his kids, became a friend to, was a better friend to his remaining friends, and that the advertising industry just goes on humming without him, right? It was sort of it was very much modeled on the Sopranos ending, the Fade to Black, where it's maybe he was shot dead, maybe things just keep moving on. You get to interpret it. Except that Weiner has sort of spoiled the ending in his post conclusion interviews, where he's put a more heavy thumb on the interpretation of Draper goes back, works for McCain Erickson, and makes that horrible advertisement.
Yeah, so I'm with you on the value of ambiguous endings, and how it's good not to tip your hand as the creator. But I guess I was trying to think back to this when I read your piece. And I was thinking about watching the end of Mad Men, which was I guess I can remember exactly when that was, because it was 2014. So it had been over for some time by then, right? By the time I'd actually finished watching it, because I was watching that show on and off with my younger brother, and we'd watch, and so I ended up, I think not watching it for long periods, and I was visiting him shortly before getting married, so it would have been 2014, and we watched the last couple episodes, we hadn't watched, and I guess as I watched it, I guess I did think that that was the ending, right, that Weiner would later suggest, right? I did think that that's what they were suggesting, that he, because that was even I remember when the McCann Erickson, the merger goes through, and they're giving everybody except Joan, right, the female partner, they don't give her anything, right, but everybody else, right, they're sort of enticing them with trying to get them excited about their new jobs by telling them about the clients, right? And when they get to Don, they're like, Coca-Cola, because that's what he had been when he earlier in the show he was almost enticed to go work for McCann, and that was the carrot even back then, right? That he was going to work for Coke.
Back in
And
1960,
yeah, exactly, right. So first season. So so I guess I did assume that he was actually this kind of spiritual epiphany at the yoga retreat. He was actually channeling into this advertising campaign for Coca-Cola. But I guess I wonder if that's true, if what the show is doing at that point is valorizing that, right? Or whether, in a sense, I mean, I guess as Jay Hutch sort of suggests in the chat, right? I mean, it's sort of like it might actually be kind of tragic, right? Like, in other words, like it's the sort of, the show has been kind of riding this tension about, like, yeah, in a certain sense, it does valorize, that creative process in the way that you were talking about earlier, with advertising, but, it's also very cynical about advertising. And that this is sort of like, I don't know, the fact that this mega corporation cynical advertising campaign can sort of absorb the energies of even this beautiful moment, is it's not good, right? But it's sort of like I wonder if that might be the sort of show's point about it, right? That it's like it's almost like, I don't know, the end of a horror movie where it's all sunny and shiny and you think the monster's gone, and then he jumps out one more time, and then it cuts to the end credits, right? That it's like, look, that the sort of Borg of advertising has managed to assimilate, even that, right? It's that doesn't necessarily strike me as valorizing it as much as just this is just this kind of at least in Don Draper's life, this is this sort of inexplicable, this sort of inescapable matrix. This is all he knows how to do.
Yeah, I mean, I, as a fan of the show, I guess I was looking for the happiest possible ending, right? And so Roger Sterling winds up with an age-appropriate, romantic partner. Peggy Olson winds up as a lead creative and finds it seems like a pretty decent dude that she had sort of with for many years. Don just needed to get out. I mean, the happiest ending for him is to get out, right? Anything else is either tragic or horrific.
Yeah.
So, I like the choose your own adventure because at least I could imagine that he gets out. I mean, he's a millionaire by that point. He doesn't need the job anymore. He doesn't need to do this.
Yeah, maybe psychologically he does, but yeah, he certainly doesn't. He certainly doesn't financially. So that last comment did remind me. We had one other interesting clip from Matthew Weiner, where he's he starts out talking about the contrast between between Mad Men. I don't know if we've got that as part of the clip or not, but and the previous show that he didn't create, but he was a writer on, which was the Sopranos, and then he kind of makes some comments at the end about Don Draper as a character. Jake, do we have that one?
Well, I mean, the biggest difference, obviously, is I didn't create Tony Soprano, and I had watched Tony on TV like everyone else for 4 seasons before I joined the show. And so, I mean, just the idea of typing Tony into the computer was kind of mind-blowing, because he's a gargantuan figure, and at the time, still, I mean, he looms very large, not only in television, but in fiction in general. But, a lot of how Tony was portrayed is about writing in the style of your boss and the way that David wanted to be. Don was deliberately a very different character. And in fact, when the very small amount of development, I wrote the pilot before I ever met anyone at AMC, and they kind of they had a few thoughts, but really didn't make any changes in it. But one of the things that they were worried about was that there was no confidant for him, that there was no Melfi, that how are we going to find out what was on his mind? And I basically said that that's the story. He's not talking to anybody. And as soon as the first person came up to me, and it was after the table read, and said, "That is my dad," I go, "What do you mean?" They go, "He's just, who knows what he's thinking?" And I'm like, "Well, you're seeing what he's doing and you're knowing what he's thinking." But Don's even said it in the show that he's part of a generation that was raised, he's from the Midwest, that it's not polite to talk about yourself. And I think the whole mystery, the whole familiarity of that character has to do with the fact that he doesn't talk. And so for me, it gave a lot of drama, because just like the opening titles, that's what they were about. There's one thing going on the inside of this guy and another thing going on the outside. And it was also kind of confusing when people said they wanted to be him, because I was like, really? Yes, you'd like to be handsome. Yes, you'd like to, I'd like to be the way he appears, but he obviously has a lot of problems. And they were like,
Which is maybe not a unique Mad Men problem, but it is funny to see him say it.
Yeah, I mean, is Don Draper Midwestern? I mean, he's from Pennsylvania, but I don't know if they ever made clear. Is he like from Western Pennsylvania? Which
Oh yeah, I don't know.
Because I mean that you know, it's not just
Yeah, calling that the Midwest is a stretch, but I know what he's trying to say.
Yeah, you know, I mean, and I guess I how much time do we have? I would say that as I was watching it, you know,
we've got a minute. Yeah,
I was sort of, you know, it was funny. I would measure myself by him because you know you watch this character, you're like, all right, how, am I that bad? Because I'm I'm kind of a quiet guy, you know. I'm it's hard to read me. You know, and I was also at the time I was watching Friday Night Lights with my wife, similar like sort of streaming.
Sure.
And in both cases, because I had like 50 people working for me at the time, so I was measuring myself against them as like a boss, you know. And I don't like being a boss, but I was a boss. And it's like, you know, and you know, there are times when you know he's a good boss, right? Like he doesn't fire Pete in season 1 when he had the ability to, because he was sort of counseled like you might need this guy, you know. I remember having a real knockdown, drag out argument with one of my proteges that like is just it's the entire suitcase argument between Don and Peggy. You know, so yeah, no, I mean,
on multiple levels. I always loved Peggy complaining that Don doesn't express, you know, doesn't say thank you more, you know, for all of her contributions, and Don say that's what the money is for.
That's what the money is for. Yeah, you want the award? That's what the money is for. And I so that one, and then the other line was just like, you know, you're in this case it was you're 26. When do you stop celebrating birthdays? Because I definitely came and I was like, why are we doing birthdays?
Yeah, well, I never. I guess the closest I came is that watching Mad Men made me feel like I, you know, even in my however old I was when that show started, you know, that the 15 years ago, that, you know, my drinking was very moderate and reasonable, but so that's my equivalent. But
people in the chat, it's a rye old fashioned.
There you go. All right. This was a lot of fun. Shaun, is there anything you want to plug on, you know, on your way out?
Buy the book.
Yeah, that would be tell the bosses that we're coming. A new action plan for workers in the 21st century. I have read it. It's good. You should, you know, if you're interested in what what organized labor could do differently, how some of what it does now sort of comes about historically, and where there might be some wrong turns, that is, you know, and just and you just want to think hard about this stuff, then I'd really recommend the book. It also functions as a kind of extended reading list, you know, for what, you know, like kind of where to go after the book. And, you know, so if you want to kind of know, you know, if you want to think hard about, you know, about how to, you know, how to have a more effective labor movement, you should read it. And if you don't, then I don't know what you're doing, you know, in life. You should really reconsider that, you know, because you're not going to be able to achieve any other sort of left political goals. So go read Shaun's book. Thank you, Shaun. All right. So that is Shaun Richman. I should check out his book. Check him out in These Times, where he's written quite a bit. Check out his essay on Mad Men at Jacobin Magazine. Meanwhile, though, we are going to stick on the intermission music for just a minute. And then we are going to be back for our philosophy segment at the end of the main show before we go to the post game with Marcus from Left Flank Veterans. But we're going to be back in just a minute to end out the main show with our philosophy segment with Dr. Jennifer Burgess. So we will be right back. Hey, we're back. Hey,
Andrew.
As I said, if you want to come see the post game after this with Marcus and the GTAA crew, then go over to patreon.com/Ben Burgess, $5 a month. Get that post game at the end of every episode, access to the Discord server, and a lot else, most importantly, including our eternal love and affection for helping to keep the show going. But
it's Ari!
Oh my goodness.
Hey!
Nice.
That's my girl!
So we are so what are we gonna talk about tonight?
Rights.
Rights. We are gonna talk about rights. So
there was supposed to be a clip.
There is
with Jordan Peterson and some other dude.
Kyle Kulinski.
That dude.
Yeah. Who I should say is this is, we teased this a little bit earlier, and I should say we'll also do a sort of full length breakdown of this conversation on Thursday with Matt McManus and possibly another guest for the Thursday night debate breakdown. But Jordan Peterson recently emerged from wherever he's been and had a conversation with Kyle Kulinski.
Does he eat vegetables now?
I hope so, because I have.
It's not good to not eat your vegetables.
Yeah, for a while there, he'd only been eating like beef. Like I think it was like literally like an all beef diet, and I don't
could
think,
at least have all chicken or something.
I don't think that's a good. I don't think that's a good idea medically. But maybe
we're not even those kind of doctors, but still we know.
Yeah. But he has, I hope, stopped doing that. He came out and talked to Kyle Kulinski. And I should say, we'll call it a debate breakdown. We do it on Thursday because that's what Kyle called it when he posted the video. And it is sort of a debate, although it's also sort of just an interview. And I'm a big fan of Kyle Kulinski. I think he had the second best debate with Charlie Kirk. But
who had the first best?
Some
guy who schooled him on Euthyphro, that's who.
In any case, but Kyle does clearly like Jordan Peterson more than I do on some subjects, right? I think like some of the sort of Jungian, mystical psychoanalytic stuff. I think that I'm maybe a little more eye-rolly about, right? He sees some more value in, and who knows. But
he did say we should clean our house and
sure.
pet cats and stuff.
Yes,
I'm behind that.
I have no problem with any of that. So we have, but of course they did disagree quite a bit on the more political side of Peterson's work, and we're going to watch just a little bit of that right now. And so as this starts, this is, the sort of more philosophical side, the more political side of this. They start out at the beginning of the clip talking about meritocracy, which I do want to get back into after we watch it. But first, let's see that clip.
And how are you going to do that exactly? With force. And so
sorry, that's not
desirable.
I like the idea of thinking of an ideal government as trying to create a better meritocracy. And in order for there to be a better meritocracy, I think in a civilized society, you can take certain things off the table. You can take healthcare off the table. You can take education off the table. Look at it this way. If we're having a 100-yard dash, I kind of want everybody to start at the same place. Whereas oftentimes...
No, you do. You don't want them to start at the same place.
Why is
you
that?
want to start them with the same lack of barriers to their movement forward.
So that's negative
that's not
rights.
the same thing.
Do you believe in any positive rights too? Because we all agree there are negative liberties of the government needs to leave me the hell alone in these respects. But aren't there also some positive rights? Isn't there a right to health care, for example?
No, there's no right to health care. There's
so you
no
don't
right
agree with
to
that?
food.
So do you
Well,
prefer
there's
the
not a
U.S.
right to
system to the socialized medicine systems, to single-payer healthcare countries?
Well, let's start with the first question first, with regard to positive rights.
Mm-hmm.
It's very rare that you have a right that requires someone else to provide it for you.
Yeah, but they have that in France, for example. They have a right to health care in their constitution.
Well, they arguably have that right. I mean, it depends. First of all, I don't like the French civil system. I think it's a catastrophe. Well, it's a Western catastrophe, so it's not that big a catastrophe, but it's nothing. It has virtually no merit compared to the English common law system. And I don't think the French civil system would have been possible without the English common law system having been there first. And under English common law, you have all the rights there are. They're not granted to you by the government. They're an intrinsic part of your being and a necessary corrective to the overreach of the state. And those are only delimited by necessity when people engage in conflict. And then that conflict is adjudicated in the English common law system, precedent by precedent. And what would you call negotiation as to the borders of rights are undertaken at the level of extreme high detail. And that's a brilliant system. The French suffer from the same delusion. They've always suffered from this delusion, this French intellectual delusion, that intellect and central planning can substitute for the incremental movement of free market systems, including free market systems in the area of jurisprudence. And that's just not the case. And the idea that you have a right to health care is like, well, who's going to provide it? You're going to force doctors to do that?
Well,
that is a well-kept forehead.
There's a lot going on in that clip. At the beginning, they're talking about meritocracy, and there's a really interesting difference between them on this, although I will say, for the record, I think they're both wrong, but the difference is still interesting. Yeah, in this case, both is the answer. So Kyle says that he thinks that like a sort of good set of social institutions is one that will create like a real meritocracy, and to have a real meritocracy, everybody has to start at the same starting point. And then Peterson says no, he doesn't even want that, right? Because that's too much sort of, I don't know, like I guess maybe maybe Peterson realizes that you'd have to have massive like redistribution of wealth to even achieve that. But like two things about that. One, that is confusing because Peterson often says, right, like this is one of his lines that he's used forever, that like, well, equality of outcome is a bad goal, but equality of opportunity is a good goal, which you think, well, if it's equality of opportunity, real equality of opportunity, you would have the same starting point. So that's one point. But then the other is, I have to say, I think that I do disagree with Kyle on the idea that even a real meritocracy, right? Like, okay, we all know that we don't live in a real meritocracy, that they're the idiot children of like very rich people, can sort of bumble through life, and land on top, through.
Like you.
Yeah, I found out today that there's this website that purports to give age and spouse and net worth and various other things of different figures, and I found out today.
I want y'all to know that he is hiding $4 to $6 million from me.
Yeah, Andy.
Because I have not seen a single million of these $4 to $6 million.
So I didn't even know they had a website on me, but Andy showed me today. And it was, part of it was upsetting, part of it was nice. The upsetting part is apparently I'm 10 years older than I thought I was. It says that I'm between 50 and 60 years old.
You're more distinguished than you realize.
So I thought I was 42. But the cool part is that apparently my net worth is $4 to $6 million. I had no idea.
That means our net worth is $4 to $6 million, dear.
Yeah, we really, I don't know why we're still living in this apartment. I think we could do better. But in any case, so, okay, we know we're not living in a real meritocracy, but at the same time, anybody who says, well, maybe this is bad because it's not a real meritocracy, but like a real meritocracy would be good, I would question, like, okay, if you really thought about what that would mean. Like, if you're saying that, like, people should have life outcomes and be rewarded for how smart and talented they are, point that John Rawls, who we'll get back to, makes about this very powerfully is that, or, G.A. Cohen, who I like a lot, says similar things, that like so much of that is outside of your control, right? I mean, you don't choose how smart you're going to be or how, like what your sort of base of potential athletic talent is or any of that stuff, right? I mean, like all of these are skills that you can work on and like sharpen, and you have to if you're going to, sort of parlay them successfully. But, not every, look, I could have spent all day, every day from a very early age doing nothing but playing basketball, and I would not be in the NBA. I think that's a fair statement because not everybody starts from the same.
I can demonstrate his shot for y'all.
Please don't.
Okay.
Please don't. So
They don't deserve that.
Nobody deserves that. So I mean, I think like real meritocracy, in a sense, like that's Gattaca. Right, that's I know that's a dated reference, but look it up. That's real meritocracy, and that's kind of a dystopia. So I do disagree about that, but I find Peterson's resistance to even real meritocracy extremely interesting. And then he goes into he says a bunch of stuff there, but like what element of it is this thing about how was it the idea that you can decree rights as a French intellectual delusion, which is I don't know, like it's just a funny combination of words to me, maybe but and he has this weird tortured analogy with markets, like that the same way that sort of critics of socialism have thought, well, you have to let markets play out, you can't have central planners try to substitute for that, and even some socialists will say, yeah, okay, fair enough, here's how we can do it in light of that. He's trying to say, well, there's some sort of analogy maybe where you can have a system of common law where rights just sort of grow up organically, and they're not like decreed by the government, which
Ooh, rights.
Yeah,
That's the word. That's what I came here to talk about.
yeah. And you could wonder about that because it's like, okay, was like, think about the abolition of slavery, right? The right not to be enslaved, like that's not something that just sort of crept up organically through common law, right? You sort of needed like action by governments to bring that about, right? That's kind of neither here nor there for the moral question about rights, but that is maybe something to think about with Jordan Peterson's understanding of the world. But let's talk about the morality of it, right? So rights in the moral sense, like put aside his many objections to France, and just say like, okay, but what are the things that are rights that should be protected or serviced or guaranteed in some way, right? By a decent society. What really counts as a right, and the reason that he gives initially, we've got a second clip that kind of follows up on this one where he gives some other arguments, but the reason that he gives initially is like, well, if you have this is kind of the same argument that like Rand Paul made, that, well, if you have a right to healthcare, that means you're going to force somebody to be a doctor. And that always struck me as a pretty silly argument. Like when we talk about every child having a right to an education, that doesn't mean we're going to like force some people at gunpoint to become teachers. That just means that like society as a whole will foot the bill for.
If anybody wanted me to become a teacher of children, they would have to shoot me. And that would not be happening.
Yeah, she goes 18 or higher.
Absolutely.
Anything else would have to be done forcibly.
Unless you're a really smart high school kid in a dual enrollment program, then you're welcome.
Fair enough. So, yeah. So the. Like this just seems like, it is true. Like there's a sort of reasonable core here that, like, if you're going to say that somebody has a right, like rights always come with duties, Like, that like if I have a right, if I have a right to not have X done to me, you have a duty to not do X to me. Right? And similarly, if you believe there are such things as positive rights, if I have a right to have X done for me, right, there is some sense in which somebody has really a duty to do X for me.
So that's too much, right? Right there, you're going too far.
I'm going too far.
You're going too far.
It's madness.
It's madness. It's craziness, lunacy. The idea that I should be forced into doing something for you. You can ask me to not do something for you, or to tell me that it's my duty to not do something, and that's fine. But how can it be my duty to do something for you?
Well, intuitively, it seems like we have many duties to do things.
Do we though?
Yes, to do things for each other. Well,
there are duties that we take on.
Well, they're
like when we got married, it was your duty to then split that $4 to $6 million with me.
Well, I think without anybody taking it on in any way, right? I think that that you have that somebody who that there are things that you have to do. I mean, I think being part of society, means that you have obligations to other members of that society. That, for example,
my obligations are to leave you alone.
That's in certain respects.
Let you do your own thing.
In certain respects, that could be one of them, but it's not the only one. Why would it be the only one?
Well, why should I have to do things for your benefit?
Because people have a moral right not to starve to death, for example, and so that means that that you have at least a collective social duty to provision them with food so they don't starve to death. That seems like a pretty intuitive.
Well, there may be other reasons why you should do that, but I don't think it's because people have an entitlement to me doing so. Why would they?
Because why wouldn't they?
Why would they be entitled to that?
So one way of breaking this tie would be to think about, okay, what is a right to anything? Like, where do negative rights come from? Right? If I have a right to have somebody refrain from something. And by the way, I should say that accepting that redistribution, right? Saying something's currently in one person's possession goes to another is positive, and whereas like not taking it is like maybe a negative right. I think that assumes that the distribution is the way it should be to start with.
Don't take my stuff.
Okay, but what makes it your stuff?
That it's my stuff.
Okay, but what makes it
my water bottle?
What makes it your stuff?
Don't take my water bottle.
Yeah, so this would be, sort of that brooding point that
like my money, I earned it through my legitimately gotten job that I perform well.
Yeah, so I think there's some ambiguity here when you say, like that. Are you talking about a legal right you have to it? Because if so, that would be irrelevant. Because if we're talking about
well, I do have a legal right.
Well,
to
not
it, but I have a moral right to have what I have done. So I did the work. I should get the reward.
Yeah. So there are two things going on here, right? One is the idea that people who produce that producing something gives you like an entitlement by labor to it, which in many cases would actually be an argument for redistribution in the current society. That like the people at an Amazon warehouse who are doing backbreaking labor should be entitled to the part of the revenue of the company that's currently being going into Jeff Bezos' spaceship when he did nothing but have this sort of legal this sort of legal ownership that they so like that would actually be an argument for redistribution. But then if you're just talking about what's mine, well, is it yours? If we're talking about what's legally yours, then that's just
yes, I know that, but you just mentioned it, so I said yes, I am legally entitled to it, given that I signed a contract.
Sure, but you're not legally entitled to the part that's being taxed away. That's the IRS is legally entitled to that. If it's about moral entitlement, but then that seems to be that begs the question, because you have say, well, any argument about whether some redistribution is justified is precisely an argument about who is morally entitled to it. And one theory is, well, we just let the chips fall where they may in a free market, that, wherever, or just like wherever you happen to, maybe possession is 9/10 of the moral law too. But
why does it have to stop there? Sure, we can let the chips fall where they may, but then why does that have to be the end?
Yeah, so
why can't we use some other method to go farther than that? Why does it have to be because someone is entitled to?
Yeah, so they have so I think ultimately, sort of like talking about taking away something that somebody has a moral entitlement to, I would argue is always a red herring, because the real issue is always who has a moral entitlement to it. And yeah, one theory could be, well, whoever happens to have it right now. Another theory could be like what somebody like John Rawls would say, right? If you asked him, how should we think about rights? And I think his answer would be, well, when you say that somebody has a right to it, something, that means that a society, a set of social institutions that denies you that is doing something unjust, whether we're talking about a negative right, that it doesn't like protect your right against certain things being done to you, or whether you're talking about a right to something, that either way, Rawls would say, well, if you're behind the veil of ignorance, you have you don't know who you're going to be in the society you're designing, would you be at all okay with some people having these and other people not, right? And so the same argument that, you wouldn't be okay with slavery because, however much you might enjoy having a slave, you would not enjoy being a slave. And you can't have various forms of discrimination, etc., which are, by the way, also, positive rights. Then you also have maybe a right to healthcare, a right to food. You certainly wouldn't sign off on being allowed to starve to death for the original position.
But you don't have the right to come take the food out of my kitchen.
Out of your kitchen, maybe not. Although somebody's starving, I would actually argue that they 100% have that right. But they have if you're hoarding food, absolutely, no question.
Who's hoarding food? Are you hoarding? It's hoarding millions of dollars, hoarding food.
All right.
Learning all sorts of stuff.
Well, so we've been going back and forth about what John Rawls thinks about this, what Jed might think about it. But let's get back to what Jordan Peterson thinks about this.
And how are you going to do that exactly? With force. And so I'm not saying that healthcare isn't desirable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's the right issue here. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about whether or not the government can and should intervene so that a healthcare minimum is provided to the populace at large. That's a different issue. The issue here is the issue of right. And rights are you don't want to multiply rights beyond necessity, because every right that you multiply puts the onus of responsibility on everyone as well. They're not cost free. And so what constitute rights is a very difficult thing to determine. I'm also not a fan of bills of rights. I think they're generally a mistake.
Really?
I like the English system much better. Yeah, absolutely.
So like the Bill of
Because
Rights
the
in
idea
America,
problem with
you don't like that?
Not particularly. No, I think it's an inelegant solution. And the reason for that is that under the English common law system from which the Bill of Rights was derived, you have all the rights there are. Whereas under a French civil system, which is, and that derivative of that is the American Bill of Rights, the government grants you the rights. And I don't believe the government grants you rights. I don't think that's how it works. I don't think rights are a secondary derivative of a social contract. That's a wrong way of looking at it, because it makes the government and the social contract the source of the rights. And I think that's a big mistake.
So you're not a fan of basically any positive rights. You think we have negative rights and that's basically the end of it, correct?
Well, you'd have to tell me exactly what positive rights you're thinking about. I don't believe that you have a right to healthcare, even though obviously the more healthcare we can provide to people in the most efficient possible manner, the better that is for everyone. Now, healthcare is a tricky one because it's an unlimited domain, because almost everything can be shoehorned into the category of health. And so that's also a problem with regards to, let's say, delimiting what might constitute the right. I mean, you have a right to healthcare. You have a right to mental health. You have a right to physical health? Well, of course you don't. Obviously not. How could you possibly have a right to those things?
Obviously not.
See, Ari comes into my office and gets granola bars and goldfish. You know, she just comes in and like opens my food drawer, starts rummaging through it, doesn't even ask. But that's her right to do so because I've given her free reign in my food drawer in my office. But if someone else were to come in there and start rummaging around in my food, I would be like, what are you doing?
Assuming, of course, that it's something that you have entitlement to with stuff that's for your personal consumption is a fair assumption. Any reasonable food distribution is going to say that. But but when it comes to the money, the money that you hold in stocks and bonds and bank accounts, etc., the idea that every single penny of those you have a moral entitlement to is at the very least much more controversial. Now, I would argue that
if you made it through the system that we have, you're entitled to it.
Why?
Because you made it through the system that we have.
Okay, but that's just
why do you sell your books, Ben? Why don't you just give them away for free on the corner? Well, because we need to buy those granola bars and goldfish so the Ari can come dig through the drawer to get them.
Yeah, the $6 million. Needs to accumulate interest in the bank account. So,
but you have to do what you have to do. But
of course, you don't want to say that like whatever system you have is the one you have to have forever.
No, I certainly don't think that.
Yeah, and so of course, part of the process of changing between one system and another might be making incremental changes. Like, for example,
but you can't just come take what I have that I earned through the system that's in place.
Well, anytime you're changing systems, by definition,
well, we change going forward.
You're doing.
You don't just come in and.
You can't change systems without changing the distribution of wealth you already have. Otherwise, you're actually going to have the same system in place that you had before. If you bought all these slaves under the old system, then if you're changing to a no slavery system,
you can't go back and make those people retroactively not slaves. They're not slaves going forward.
Okay, well, you don't get to have this wealth going forward. So happily, you're right. There's no way for you to not have had it in the past, but there's damn well a way for you not to have it.
You can't just take it away from me.
Of course you can. I mean, they have that's like, you might have, like, this could be something you could say when we first started to have public education. It's like, well, if you didn't think in the past that any of your income was going to be taxed to pay for public education, you can't start taxing it to pay for public education now. And it's, I mean, you'd have to come up with a disanalogy. So this is, I think that in some sense, like, this might just be arguing about words. You would not know this from hearing her right now because she is giving it her argumentative all. But they have Jen is all in favor of taxation to pay for healthcare and all that stuff, and has expressed that many times. She just doesn't think it's a matter of rights. She has a different way of thinking about what's most important in morality, about virtue, I guess, and instead of justice as the central concept, right? So if it's a disagreement like that Jordan Peterson is having with Kyle Kulinski, then okay. I mean, this is one of the views of Jordan Peterson I'd object to the least, right? If he's just saying like, yeah, by all means, let's have a big expansive welfare state, but like, don't use the word right when you're talking about it, right? But I think that there maybe is a more real disagreement here between Kyle and Dr. Peterson, which is, like, forget the word right for a second, right? Would it be deeply morally outrageous for a society that has the collective resources to pay for a system of national health care to not do that, to let people die of easy?
I think that would be outrageous.
Yeah.
Morally outrageous.
Yeah, I know you do. I am very curious about whether
I don't know. You seem kind of iffy there a minute ago.
No, this is not our first conversation about any of these topics. There's some disagreements about how to think about it philosophically, but the upshot we certainly come together on.
I'm not sure rights are even a thing.
Sure.
But you know.
Yeah. So if Jordan Peterson is a genist on this, then I don't have that much objection. But his rhetoric at the end there would certainly suggest otherwise. That he says, well, do you have a right to like psychiatric health care? Clearly not, right? Which is amazing.
Does he mean health or health care?
Yeah, I mean, if you're saying you don't have a right to psychiatric health in the sense that, like, it could be that your doctors can't help you and that's just a tragedy, but it's unavoidable, then, you know, fair enough, right? Medicine is imperfect. If it means that if you are too poor to afford it, then as you're having a mental health crisis, you know, you shouldn't get psychiatric care, then it wouldn't be, in fact, morally outrageous for a society that has the ability to provide people with psychiatric cares. They can get, you know, psychiatric medications that they need, so they don't end up in the hospital, et cetera, et cetera. Then we do have a much more serious disagreement. So find out. We're going to watch. I'm going to watch the entire debate with the entire Kyle Kulinski Jordan Peterson debate with my very good friend Matthew McManus and possible second guest TBA on Thursday night. So for our Thursday night debate breakdown at 8 p.m. EST. So I can tune into that to find out if my suspicions about some of Peterson's bad views, which I mean, we know he has lots of other topics, but you know, on this are confirmed. But meanwhile,
You know what I'm gonna do right now?
You are gonna watch Better Call Saul, would be my guess.
I'm gonna go have some good. Yeah, y'all know I love you because I am missing the return of Better Call Saul to be here. But what I was gonna say is I'm gonna go have some goldfish.
Fair enough. So I, meanwhile, am going to be sticking around because in just a minute I'm going to be back with our producer Jake, graphic designer Andy, and guest Marcus for the postgame for GTAA patrons. Once again, that's patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I don't actually have $46 million, so the Patreon money really is what keeps the show going. Should be a real good time. If you're a patron, you should already have the email, or if you go to Patreon, you should be able to see the link for the postgame there. I will see people there.
Team Snoopy forever.
Left is best.